If there was one thing my family needed, it was a break. Life had been a whirlwind of work, school, and stress, and Oregon seemed like the perfect escape. My husband Eric and I had spent weeks planning this trip. 2 weeks of peace, just us and our 2 boys, Logan, 17, and Ben, 14. We found a gorgeous Airbnb near Cannon Beach, secluded, surrounded by forest and far from the chaos of everyday life. It was exactly what we were looking for. The host, Isabella Martinez, was super responsive and friendly. She answered all my questions, sent recommendations for nearby restaurants, and even offered to stock the fridge with a few basics before we arrived. Everything about the place seemed perfect. That was until we got there. After a long drive, we pulled up to the house. Beautiful, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the trees. It felt almost too good to be true. Eric and Logan started unloading the car while Ben and I checked out the inside. The house was even better than in the pictures. Spacious, cozy, with that crisp, clean smell of fresh wood. As I set our bags down in the main bedroom, I noticed a message from Isabella that I hadn't seen before. Just a quick note. My daughter lives in the basement, but she has her own entrance. You won't even know she's there. I frowned. How had I missed this? I read through our previous messages, and sure enough, it was right there, buried between restaurant recommendations. I showed Eric, but he shrugged. She has her own entrance. No big deal. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling in my stomach. After all, we were here to relax. That night I woke up to a strange sound. At first I thought I was dreaming, but as I blinked myself awake, I realized it was real. Loud, deliberate, and coming from below us. Heavy footsteps. Furniture dragging. I checked my phone. 3:30 a.m. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, moving back and forth. Then, after a few minutes, they stopped. The next morning, over breakfast, I casually asked if anyone else had heard anything. Ben looked up from his plate. Yeah, it sounded like someone was moving furniture downstairs. It woke me up. Logan, of course, laughed. Maybe Isabella's daughter was redecorating at 3 a.m. Eric, who could sleep through a hurricane, just sipped his coffee. I didn't hear a thing. I decided to message Isabella just in case. Hey, we heard some noises from the basement last night. Just checking if everything's okay. Her reply came quickly. So sorry. My daughter isn't used to visitors. I'll talk to her. That was it. No explanation, no reassurance. Just that. I didn't like it, but I let it go. At the end of the day, we were on vacation, and I wasn't going to let some weird late-night noises ruin it. That night, after a long day exploring Cannon Beach, we finally settled in. Eric and I poured ourselves some wine. The boys were glued to their phones, and for the first time since we arrived, I actually started to relax. Then the noises started again. At first it was the same, footsteps, dragging sounds. But this time it was different. Louder, angrier. It sounded like someone was pounding on the walls. Eric muted the TV. What the hell is that? I stared at the floor, heart pounding. It was coming from directly beneath us. Before we could react, Ben came sprinting into the living room, his face pale. There's someone in the house, he whispered. I shot up from the couch. What? What do you mean? Ben was shaking. She was standing in my doorway, just staring at me. Logan rolled his eyes. Dude, seriously? I swear to God, Logan, she was right there. Long black hair, pale face, just staring. And when I blinked, she was gone. I turned to Eric, expecting him to brush it off, but even he looked uneasy. I grabbed my phone and texted Isabella. I'm really sorry to bother you again, but my son just saw someone inside the house. Are you sure your daughter isn't coming upstairs? Her response came almost immediately. Oh no, she doesn't like visitors. That was it. No denial, no explanation. Just that. That was the moment I decided we needed answers. Eric and I walked straight to the basement door. It was locked, but something about it felt off. I knocked. Silence. I knocked again. Hello? Still nothing. But then, just as I turned away, there was a noise. A single deliberate knock from the other side. I backed up so fast I nearly tripped. Eric grabbed my arm, eyes wide. "Okay," he said, forcing a laugh. That was creepy. I tried calling Isabella. This time she actually picked up. "Hey, She cut me off. "She just needs time to adjust." Her voice was shaky, nervous, like she knew something she wasn't telling us. I swallowed hard. "Isabella, is your daughter really in the basement?" There was a pause. Then she laughed, an awkward, forced laugh. Of course, where else would she be? I hung up. Eric and I stood there for a moment, staring at the locked door, listening to the silence behind it. We didn't go back to sleep that night. We just waited and waited. And when the sun finally came up, I told myself we were overreacting, that it was just a weird misunderstanding. I had no idea how wrong I was. The next night, Logan, being the reckless teenager he was, decided to prove we were all overreacting. "I'm gonna check out the basement," he announced casually. "Logan, no," I snapped. But of course, he ignored me. Before I could stop him, he grabbed a flashlight and slipped down the hallway. Ben's face went pale. "Mom, stop him." I didn't need to. The moment Logan unlocked the basement door, something changed. A gust of air, cold, stale, hit us like a wall. The stairway was pitch black, the kind of darkness that felt heavy, suffocating. Logan hesitated for the first time. Maybe this isn't..." Then something moved. It wasn't a sound exactly, but a shift in the air, like something was waiting for us in the dark. Eric grabbed Logan's arm. "Enough, let's go." But just as he pulled Logan back, I caught a glimpse of something at the bottom of the stairs. A dim flicker of light. A candle. My stomach turned. Eric hesitated, then reached for the light switch. Nothing. The basement lights were dead. "I don't like this," Ben whispered. Neither did I, but something in me needed to see it. So I stepped forward, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The basement wasn't a living space. There were no beds, no furniture, no signs that anyone had been staying there. Just an altar. A single candle burned on a wooden table. In front of it, a small, ornate urn, and next to the urn, a framed photograph. I felt Ben tense beside me. His breathing turned shaky. "That's her," he whispered. I barely heard him. The girl in the photo had long black hair, a pale, solemn face. It was the same description Ben had given us, the same woman he had seen in his doorway. I backed away, my legs trembling. "Oh my God." Eric turned to me, confused. "What the hell is this?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because in that moment I realized the truth. Isabella's daughter wasn't living in the basement. She was dead, and we had been sharing the house with something that shouldn't have been there. My hands were shaking as I called Isabella. She picked up on the first ring. "You saw her, didn't you?" My throat went dry. "What is this?" She sighed, almost sad. "She never left," Isabella murmured. "I keep her here. She gets lonely." A wave of nausea rolled over me. She's haunting this place," I stammered. Isabella didn't answer. I turned to Eric. "We need to go. Now." Within minutes, we were throwing our things into bags, shoving clothes into suitcases. I didn't care if we forgot anything. I just wanted out. By the time we got to the car, Ben was shaking, Logan was silent, and Eric looked as pale as I felt. We drove through the night without looking back. I never spoke to Isabella again. But sometimes, even now, I wonder, if we had stayed just one more night, What would have happened? I reported Isabella to Airbnb the next day. Her listing was removed immediately, but the damage had already been done. Ben refused to sleep alone for weeks. Every night, he would wake up in a panic, convinced he saw someone standing in his doorway. And sometimes when I lay in bed at night, I swear I hear it too. The faintest sound of furniture scraping against the floor, the slow, deliberate footsteps of someone moving just beneath us. I tell myself it's my imagination, but deep down I know better. Some things never really leave. Some things never let go. I travel a lot for work. Not the glamorous kind of travel, just long drives, cheap hotels, and bad coffee. This time, I had a week-long gig in Portland, Oregon, and instead of another soulless motel, I figured I'd try something different. A quick search on Airbnb led me to this small house in the Alberta Arts District. Nothing fancy, but it allowed pets. That was the deal breaker. My golden retriever, Murphy, comes with me everywhere. The place had no reviews, but the price was too good to pass up. Probably some new host trying to build their rating, I told myself. Besides, it was a whole house, not just some tiny apartment. Sounded perfect. I arrived late in the afternoon, parked in the driveway, and the first thing Murphy did when I opened the car door, he refused to get out. Just sat there, ears pinned back, staring at the house like it had personally insulted him. "Come on, buddy," I sighed, tugging his leash. He hesitated before jumping down, sniffing the air as if something was off. The house itself looked normal. A bit old maybe, but nothing creepy. A small front porch, a neat little garden, and a backyard big enough for Murphy to run around. The key was under the mat, just like the host had said. Inside, it was clean but weirdly empty. Like, too clean. No personal touches, no books or decorations, just furniture and bare walls. I figured the host probably wanted to keep it neutral for guests. Still, something about it felt off. That night, Murphy wouldn't stop pacing. Every time I settled into bed, I'd hear him clicking across the floor, sniffing around, then heading to the back door, whining. "Murphy, come on, man, go to sleep," I groaned, but he wouldn't listen. He kept staring at the backyard, ears twitching like he was waiting for something. At some point, I dozed off, only to wake up around 3 a.m. to a low growl. Not a playful one, a warning. I sat up. "Murphy?" He was by the back door, tail stiff, staring out the window. I got up, rubbing my eyes, and peeked outside. Nothing, just the yard. "Dude, there's nothing out there," I muttered. But even as I climbed back into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling. Something wasn't right. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Murphy scratching at the back door, his nails scraped against the wood, his tail wagging anxiously. He wasn't just restless, he was fixated. All right, I grumbled, rubbing my eyes as I shuffled over to let him out. As soon as I opened the door, he bolted into the yard, nose to the ground, sniffing like crazy. He circled a specific patch of dirt near the fence, barking and digging at it like something was buried there. "Murph, stop." I yanked his leash, pulling him away. His fur bristled, but he reluctantly obeyed. I looked down at the spot he had been scratching at. The dirt looked uneven, like it had been disturbed recently. That nagging feeling from last night crept back. Maybe the previous guests buried something weird there. A pet. Some trash. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe I was just letting Murphy's paranoia get to me. I needed coffee. After grabbing a cup from a cafe down the street, I took Murphy for a walk around the neighborhood. That's when I ran into an older woman watering her plants a few houses down. She gave me a tight-lipped smile, her eyes flickering to Murphy. "You staying at the Holloway house?" she asked, her voice careful. I blinked. Yeah. Just for a few days." Her expression tightened. She hesitated, glancing at the house before shaking her head. Didn't think they'd rent it out again so soon. Again? What do you mean? I asked. She pursed her lips, wiping her hands on her gardening gloves. Strange things have happened there. That was not what I wanted to hear. Like what? She sighed. People come and go, never stays occupied for long. Then, more to herself, she muttered, maybe that's why they didn't list the owner's name this time. A weird chill ran down my spine. Who owns it? She shook her head. I shouldn't say, just be careful. And with that, she turned and went inside, leaving me standing there with way too many questions. Murphy whined, pulling me toward home. But now, I wasn't so sure I wanted to go back. That evening, I tried to shake off the uneasiness, but it was like an itch I couldn't scratch. Everything about this place, the spotless, impersonal interior, Murphy's weird behavior, the neighbor's cryptic warning, it was all piling up in my head. I tried distracting myself, putting on a movie, scrolling through my phone. But Murphy wouldn't let it go. He sat by the back door, ears perked, staring outside like he was waiting for something. Come on, Murph, I sighed. Enough already. But he didn't even look at me, just kept whimpering. I caved. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped onto the porch and pointed the beam at the uneven patch of dirt near the fence. Murphy immediately lunged for it, digging like his life depended on it. And then I smelled it, something foul. I gagged, stepping back. That was not normal. That's when I heard it. A loud knock at the front door. I froze, my heart pounded in my ears. Who the hell? Another bang, this time more urgent. I grabbed Murphy's leash and hurried inside. When I opened the door, I found 3 cops standing there. One of them, a tall guy with sharp eyes, immediately stepped forward. Sir, step outside now. I blinked. What? What's going on? He didn't answer. Another officer pushed past me, heading straight for the backyard. Then the words that made my stomach drop. We have a warrant to search this property. I stood there, stunned, as police swarmed the backyard. One of them stopped near the spot Murphy had been digging and pulled out a small shovel. I didn't want to see what they were about to find, but I couldn't look away. The officer dug only a few inches before hitting something, a plastic tarp. A third officer came over, crouched down, and slowly peeled back the plastic. The stench hit me like a brick wall. Even in the dim light, I could see the outline of a human hand. I staggered back, nearly tripping over Murphy. The officer who had spoken to me before grabbed my arm, steadying me. This house belongs to a man named James Holloway, he said. We've been investigating him for a while. He's been renting out his property to keep people from noticing what's buried here. My mouth went dry. Wait, you mean the guy who owns this place? He's a serial killer, the officer confirmed. And we have reason to believe some of his victims are buried right here. The yard spun around me. I felt sick. I had been sleeping in that house, living there, completely unaware that just feet away bodies were rotting beneath the ground. Murphy had known the whole time, and I hadn't listened. I didn't sleep that night. I barely even breathed. The police sealed off the house, turning it into a full-on crime scene. Officers moved in and out, talking in hushed tones, marking off areas with bright yellow tape. The smell from the backyard clung to my clothes, my skin, my hair. I couldn't escape it. One officer told me I could leave, that they'd contact me if they needed anything. But where was I supposed to go? My suitcase was still inside, my keys, my wallet. Everything I owned was sitting in a murder house. Murphy stayed pressed against my leg the entire time, his tail low, his body tense. He had tried to warn me, and I had ignored him. I finally grabbed my stuff from the house, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were watching me leave, like the place itself knew what had happened there. By the next morning, the news had already exploded. The Portland butcher, serial killer's house exposed. Airbnb horror, guest stumbles into murder investigation. Dog leads owner to serial killer's graveyard. I didn't even realize I had become part of the story. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed. I read every article, every police report, trying to understand who James Holloway really was. Turns out, he had been using short-term rentals as a perfect cover. The constant flow of guests kept suspicion low, and anytime someone asked about the property, he could just say it was a rental. Some of his victims had never even been reported missing, and I had almost become one of them. Even now, months later, I can't book an Airbnb without triple-checking everything. If a place doesn't have hundreds of verified reviews, I'm out. If the host has no history, not a chance. Murphy, he never leaves my side, because next time when he tells me something's wrong, I'll listen. I still remember how excited Sarah and I were about our trip to Key West. We had been looking forward to a break from work, some beach time, and just enjoying each other's company. When we found this Airbnb, a spacious apartment at an unbelievably cheap price, we thought we'd hit the jackpot. The listing looked perfect: clean rooms, modern furniture, and a great location near the beach. The only catch: the host, Michael, only communicated via text. He sent check-in instructions but never met us in person. I found it a little weird. But honestly, we were just happy to have a place that didn't break the bank. The apartment itself looked fine when we arrived. The kitchen was stocked with the basics, the bedroom was cozy, and the balcony had a decent view. There was just one odd thing: a locked door in the hallway with a small sign. Storage, do not open. I figured it was just a supply closet, like in most rentals. That first night, everything seemed normal. Until I woke up at around 3 a.m. to a faint knocking sound. It wasn't loud, but it was consistent. 3 slow taps, then silence. I lay there listening, my heart picking up pace. Sarah was sound asleep beside me. I got up, checked the apartment, and peeked outside the window, but there was nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just the building settling, maybe an old pipe or something. I climbed back into bed, trying not to overthink it. I should have trusted my gut. The next morning, Sarah looked at me over her coffee and said, "I know this sounds crazy, but I feel like someone's watching us." I almost laughed. "You mean like from outside?" "No," she said, lowering her voice. "Since we got here, I've felt off, like we're not alone." I wanted to reassure her, but truth be told, I hadn't been able to shake the weird feeling either. Something about the place was off, but I brushed it off as paranoia. That night, I stayed up later than usual, watching some random show on my laptop while Sarah dozed off. Then, just past 2 a.m., the noises started again. But this time, it wasn't just knocking. It was footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps, almost like someone dragging their feet. They weren't coming from outside. They weren't even coming from the apartment next door. They were coming from inside the walls. I froze, barely breathing, as the sound moved from one side of the room to the other. Then there was another noise, something that sent chills down my spine. A faint creaking, like something on wheels being pushed forward. I didn't wake Sarah. I just lay there, ears straining, every nerve in my body on edge. The sounds eventually faded, but I barely slept that night. By morning, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't in my head. Something was wrong with this place. By the time the sun came up, I was done pretending everything was fine. Sarah noticed I was tense and asked what was wrong. I hesitated for a second, but then told her everything. About the footsteps, the dragging sound, and how it all seemed to come from inside the walls. She went pale. "Matt, I wasn't going to tell you, but I swear I saw something last night." I felt my stomach tighten. What do you mean? She swallowed hard. I woke up for a second, and I thought I saw a shadow move, like in the corner of the room. But when I blinked, it was gone. I convinced myself I was imagining things. That was it. I needed to figure out what the hell was going on. I started checking the walls, running my hands over them, looking for anything unusual. That's when I noticed it. Tiny holes, barely the size of a pencil tip, scattered near the headboard of our bed. My skin crawled. Were these peepholes? I hesitated for a second, then leaned in and squinted through one. At first, I could barely make anything out, just darkness. But then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A bed, a lamp dimly lit, and a figure shifting slightly on the mattress. Someone was living behind the wall. I jumped back so fast I nearly fell over. My heart was racing out of control. Sarah saw my face and grabbed my arm. "Matt, what? What did you see?" I grabbed her shoulders, my voice low and urgent. "We need to go, now." Sarah didn't argue. She could see the panic in my face. I grabbed our bags and stuffed whatever we could into them. We didn't even bother folding our clothes. We just shoved everything inside. We tried to act normal as we made our way to the front door, but my hands were shaking as I grabbed the keys. Just as I turned to leave, something made me stop. The locked door, the one marked "Storage, Do Not Open." It was slightly ajar. A sickening realization hit me. Whoever was behind that wall might be watching us right now. I swallowed hard and nudged the door open just enough to peek inside. The smell hit me first, a mix of sweat, old fabric, and something rotten. Inside, there was a mattress on the floor, stained and covered in a thin, disgusting sheet. Empty food containers were stacked in the corner. And worse, a small camera setup positioned perfectly behind one of the peepholes. I felt my stomach turn. "Matt." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "What is it?" I didn't answer. I just grabbed her hand and practically dragged her out of there. We sprinted to the car and peeled out of the driveway, not looking back. We didn't stop until we were miles away. Only then did we finally breathe. Sarah was shaking. I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. "We have to call the police," she said. I nodded. "Yeah, right now." The moment we pulled into a gas station, I grabbed my phone and called the police. I explained everything, the strange noises, the peepholes, the hidden room, and the man living inside the walls. The dispatcher didn't sound surprised. "We'll send officers to investigate," she said. "Stay available in case we need more information." That was it. No urgency, no shock. Just another call on a Tuesday night. Sarah and I sat in the car, watching the station lights flicker. The adrenaline was fading, but the fear wasn't. I kept replaying everything in my head. What if we had stayed another night? What if he had come out? A few hours later, the police called back. The officer's voice was steady, but I could hear the tension. "You were right," he said. "There was someone inside the walls." My chest tightened. The man's name is Henry Dixon. He's been using a fake profile to rent out the apartment. Turns out he stole his mother's identity after she passed away. He's been living in that hidden space for months, watching guests through those peepholes. Sarah covered her mouth in horror. "But here's the part that really got us," the officer continued. "We found recordings, a lot of them. He's been filming every guest that stayed there." I felt sick. The officer sighed. "You two got lucky. There have been other guests who, well, let's just say they didn't leave a review." Sarah's grip tightened on my arm. I didn't want to ask what he meant. I already knew. Henry was arrested that night. Turns out he had been escalating, starting with voyeurism, but moving on to breaking into rooms while people were asleep. We had gotten out just in time. After that, Sarah and I swore off sketchy rentals for good. Every hotel, every Airbnb, we checked everything. We knocked on walls, looked behind mirrors, made sure there weren't any weirdly placed vents or cameras. I stopped trusting places with locked storage rooms. Sarah wouldn't even stay in a rental that didn't have multiple verified reviews. Some nights, when I can't sleep, I think about the other guests before us. The ones who never realized they were being watched. The ones who maybe didn't make it out, and worst of all, I still don't know how long he was watching us, but one thing's for sure. We were never going back to Key West. Lauren and I had been looking forward to this trip for months. As college professors, summer break was our rare chance to escape the chaos of work, and this time, we wanted something peaceful. No crowded cities, no noisy hotels, just a quiet little house in New Hope, Pennsylvania, where we could relax, read, and maybe explore some hiking trails. The Airbnb listing looked perfect. A cozy, historic home tucked away in a leafy neighborhood. The reviews were glowing, and the host, Daniel, seemed like a good guy. Quick responses, friendly attitude. Everything checked out. When we pulled up to the house, it was just as charming as the pictures. A little old, but that only added to the character. Daniel greeted us at the door, a young guy, probably in his late 20s, with an easygoing smile. "Hope you guys have a great stay," he said, handing over the keys. "Oh, just a heads up, the attic is locked. Nothing important up there, just some old furniture and tools." I nodded, barely listening. Why would we care about the attic? We spent the rest of the day settling in, grabbing groceries, and enjoying the small-town atmosphere. The air smelled fresh, and the streets were lined with quaint little shops and cafes. It felt good to be away. That night, Lauren sat outside on the patio while I made coffee in the kitchen. I heard her call my name, her voice tight. "Brandon, come here." I stepped outside. She was staring up at the house, her expression tense. "Look at the attic window," she whispered. I followed her gaze. Nothing seemed off at first, just an old window with dust-streaked glass. Then something moved, a flicker of motion like a shadow passing behind the glass. A chill ran down my spine. "It was probably just a tree branch," I said, trying to sound casual, "or a bird flying past." Lauren didn't look convinced, neither was I, but I didn't want to freak her out over what was probably nothing. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, I heard something upstairs. A soft thud. I froze, listening. The sound didn't come again. Probably just the house settling. At least, that's what I told myself. The next morning, I woke up to a smell so foul it made my stomach turn. It wasn't just musty or stale. It was thick, rotten, like something had been left to decay for days. Lauren was already up, standing near the staircase with a hand over her nose. "Do you smell that?" she asked, her voice muffled. "Yeah," I said, gagging slightly. Maybe a dead animal got stuck somewhere. We started walking around the house, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. The closer we got to the stairs, the stronger it got. And then I noticed something that sent a chill through me. The attic door. It was supposed to be locked. Daniel had said so. But now, it was slightly open, just a crack, like someone had pushed it from the inside. Lauren took a step back. "Brandon, don't." I should have listened. I really should have. But something about that open door, it felt wrong, like it was daring me to look. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. Taking slow, cautious steps, I climbed the attic stairs, my breath tight in my chest. With each step, the smell grew stronger. Rotten, sour, suffocating. I reached the top and aimed my phone's light into the attic's darkness. Dust swirled in the air, settling over piles of old furniture and forgotten junk. And then, I saw her. A girl sprawled on the wooden floor, her body stiff and twisted. Her eyes were open. Her throat was cut. I stumbled back so fast I nearly fell down the stairs. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. Lauren saw my face and knew. What? What did you see? I couldn't speak. I just grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Within minutes, sirens shattered the quiet morning. The police arrived, swarming the house with flashlights and radios crackling. Lauren and I stood outside, wrapped in a blanket one of the officers had given us. A detective pulled me aside. "You're the one who found the body?" I nodded, my throat dry. The attic was now a crime scene. Officers moved in and out, speaking in hushed tones. Then Daniel arrived. He looked genuinely shocked, his face pale. "What the hell is going on?" I watched as they pulled him aside for questioning. He swore up and down he had no idea. I wasn't sure if I believed him. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, crime scene tape, and news reports. The house, once a peaceful getaway, had turned into something straight out of a nightmare. Lauren and I barely spoke. We were still in shock. The image of that girl's lifeless body was burned into my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her staring back at me. The police finally pieced together what happened. The girl, 19 years old, had stayed in the house a few weeks before us with a group of college friends. But that trip had ended in horror. After a night of drinking, two of the guys tried to force themselves on her. She fought back. They killed her. In a panic, they dragged her body to the attic, thinking no one would find it. Instead of reporting the crime, her so-called friends just packed their bags and left, pretending like nothing happened. Lauren was shaking when we heard the full story. They just left her there. I didn't have an answer. I couldn't even process how someone could do something like that. The police arrested the two guys responsible. It made local news, but I didn't want to see any of it. I didn't want to know their names, their excuses. I just wanted to forget. But I couldn't. Lauren and I cut our trip short. We packed our bags and left New Hope without looking back. We never used Airbnb again. No matter how nice the listing looked, no matter how great the reviews were, we were done. From that day forward, we only stayed in hotels, safer, less personal, no surprises. But even in the safety of home, late at night, when the house is quiet, sometimes I still feel it, that heaviness, that cold feeling in my chest, like a reminder that somewhere out there, in another Airbnb, another dark secret is waiting to be uncovered.